I remember back to a time in which I had very little stress in my life, in which I had felt that everything was comfortable and normal and nice and cool. And that was early 2017 and late 2016, a time in which I had virtually no friends. Back then, what I used to do was spend my days watching content on YouTube and making vlogs about my progress in making content on YouTube. I had a blog that I would write on as well, and a lot of the posts nowadays are completely forgettable, otherwise to laugh at, but I was trying really hard to make something at the time in order to build myself into something. I was basically the the Apollonian ideal, if you will, like because I was just using everything, that wasn't involving other people to just build my own skill and build my own strength as a person. Because, like, if you think about what Apollonian is, it's just taking the forces of nature in order to build something on your own. It's lacking of emotional connections and like if you think of Dionysian, it's the emotional attached one, and then Apollonian is the more logical one that's sort of just on their own building things. And I was basically at that point in my life, or you could say it was sort of Epicurean in a way, but the thing about Epicurus is that he wants you to have close friends, whereas I had simply no friends. I was no longer human to a even greater degree than the Epicureans are. Um, and so I think the person who is able to isolate themselves away from humanity completely and still be happy and still survive off of their own will, essentially becoming no longer human, I think that person is a god because they have no reliance on others. They're just able to build their own experience. They're able to build the thing that makes them happy. And they do that entirely out of their own volition, out of their own will, out of, the tools at their disposal. They've built something out of it that gives them genuine happiness. And sure, I was depressed at the time, but the main reason I was depressed, other than my assortment of mental disorders, was actually just because my content was bad. And over time, I began to accept that it was bad. And through that acceptance, I was able to find solutions to actually make it better. Because I wasn't so anxious as to look at my videos with disgust and then not be able to analyze them any further. I would just record something and then not look at it because the anxiety and depression I would receive from making a video would counterweight the analytical aspect of just like looking at it and saying, these are the flaws, these are the things I can change. And it wasn't as if I didn't enjoy making the content. No, I loved making the videos. It's just that I was feeling so much stress from the idea that they weren't good enough for my own standard. And so the majority of my depression didn't actually come from a lack of people. In fact, the times around that point in my life when I tried to interact with people, I just got more depressed because I felt that my time was being wasted on these boring sheep who were simply living day to day without ambition, without wanting to build something of their own. I was someone who wanted to build something, who wanted to spend my time trying to foster a skill, whereas I saw everybody else just husks of meat wanting to get dopamine and have sex and do all these other things that were, Dionysian. And the more I would think about it, the more I would just get so disgusted with everybody else because no one had this like big thing that they were trying to build upon. No one had a narrative of themselves in their head that they were trying to craft, of an ideal self that they were trying to work towards. They were simply living day to day for the pleasures of day to day. And while I think that is inherently less valuable than trying to build something of yourself, I do respect it for what it is. I think those people serve a purpose within society. I certainly wouldn't be able to collect disability without those people existing and having jobs and doing their own Dionysian thing. And so, I appreciate their existence, but I do think from a purely philosophical value standpoint, the artist, the programmer, the crafter, the inventor, all of these different things are inherently more cool and more valuable. All those people, as I said, they're sheep, they're NPCs, non-player characters. They let their lives be controlled by emotions and dopamine rather than by a vision for the future, a vision of their will. And that is an example of a human that you don't want to be. Or maybe you do. And if you do, that's okay. You have your own place. And if you're happy, I mean, that's what matters. But there are some of us who just can't live that life. The experiences in our lives have led us to a point where we just reject that. And I believe the experience that led me to having a more Apollonian lifestyle was homeschool. Was that in homeschool, from the beginning, I took charge of my own will in the sense that I knew what I wanted to do, and it wasn't school, so I would actively cheat and cut corners to not do school. And I wasn't supervised, and I never went outside. So until I was about 12 and a half, I basically did nothing but sit around in my room. Now, of course, I walked into the living room here and there to bother people, but the majority of the time I spent was alone. And when you're alone, and when you actively are getting away from what society wants you to do from day one, you start thinking a lot. You start ruminating on the things you enjoy and what you actually want to do instead of what you told to do. And that's when the player character is built. And that's where, the artist, the inventor, that's where they're built. And so I start when I'm about, I want to say 13. Yeah, 13. I start working on a YouTube channel as like my main thing that I'm trying to do. Now, before this, there were tons and tons of different failed endeavors. I tried to draw for years and years of my life. Basically, from the beginning, I wanted to be a comic artist or a cartoonist, and I put big, big amounts of emphasis in my own time and in my own life on these like MS Paint slideshows that I would make with my Windows XP computer. And I was way into the idea of telling stories. That's a very like control, will, big goal type thing to do in the beginning, right? It's not like I'm gonna do my schoolwork, go home and watch TV. It's I'm actively pursuing a thing from a young age. That's a player character mentality. That's a control free will mentality. It's not like an NPC mentality. You get what I'm saying? And so all that time in isolation led me to be this very, you know, emotionless sort of misanthropic character that did not concern themselves with the lives of other people and wanted to ingrain themselves in fantasy. That's what I still do now. I still have these really vast and detailed fantasies that I lay out in my own head. I still get swept away by the worlds of video games and the worlds of television and of books and of my own work on YouTube and of the work that I'm trying to build in other mediums that hasn't been released yet. And so I really think about this time, 2016, the late part, and early 2017. Now, at this point, the only social interaction I got was the show The D-Pad. Now, I didn't really talk to my parents at this time. they would have to drag me kicking and screaming to go to a store because I would always want to be alone working on things or listening to the sounds of other people working on things on YouTube. And so I rarely talked to them. I would just stay in my room, fucking piss in bottles so I wouldn't have to get up and go to the bathroom and be seen and potentially asked to go somewhere. I would just stay in my room for this period of eighth grade. Um, and I had a pretty rough time at school at that point too, where I was basically just done with people, where I had been getting into so many fights, I was bullied so much that I was like, yeah, people are worthless husks, and I'm gonna go do my own thing. And lo and behold, I find that boy, Digibro, and I watch all of his videos, and he's constantly making them, and then I get inspired to rearrange my channel and do it in a different way. And so from there, I start doing the whole Outlaw Harvest thing. That's what I was called at the time. And in that point, from late 2016, early 2017, my whole life was just figuring out how to do YouTube and, you know, not talking to people. The friend that I needed was just on the computer. Like, it was through YouTube that I connected with others. It was through art that I connected with others. And that was enough for me to substantiate the lack of friendships IRL that I had, because all I really needed was to hear somebody else's voice to get that dopamine in my head going to believe that someone else was in the room, and then I moved on with the rest of my day. It was like a simulation of sorts, a parasocial relationship, if you will, one that is the one on the receiving end is the viewer, but the person on the other end has no investment in the viewer themselves. So it's like you're friends with somebody, but they're not friends with you, you know? So I was getting basically all I needed. And I just holed up in my room working. Only people who I talked to was once a week. Once a week, I would go on the podcast, The D-Pad. On this show, it was strictly business related for me. I would sometimes say something in the chat, like I would type out a message and then be done from there. And I would sometimes link a news article or something that I thought would be good on the show, but I didn't really go into calls with these people unless it were being recorded. And so once a week, I was very specific about getting it done once a week. I do remember that. Um, I would do this show, and it would be content. That was my relationship to others, was work, content, because all I cared about was just becoming better at that content. And so I had basically no relationship with my parents at this point because I just stayed in my room all the time. Late at night, I would sleep, until 5 p.m. and then stay awake until like 8 in the morning. And I would go to sleep when the daylight was out. That's how I would do things, just completely avoidant of others. And I was pretty happy at this time, despite the depression of, low self-esteem and trying to anxiously figure out how to make content. Other than that, that was really the main heap that I had, and, existential feelings as well about death and all that. But other than those things, I was really happy at this time, like just in my own head making things. And I look back on this time with an immense fondness because I, you know, it's a feel. It was a feel that I was used to and that I grew up on. My brain was fundamentally structured around a lack of social relationships from the beginning. And so why would I do anything different than that? Why would my brain be able to easily adapt to something so new and strange like social interaction? Now, I've taught myself to be good at it. I am very good at it, but it's not something I ever get used to or want to do on a continual basis because at the core, I need that alone time. I need to be away from all people, to be away from the stimulation, to work on myself, to build something Apollonian, to make my craft. And so, here we are, reminiscing and trying to figure out a course of action for life, and makes me immensely miss that time. And I've realized that I need to go back. I need to go back to the no longer human era of Infinite Outlaw, and I've made these videos like the biological path where I essentially argue that, you need human connections in order to do blah blah blah, but honestly, I don't think that's entirely true, because there are plenty of monks, for example, who remain entirely isolated from the world, from the fucking sun, and somehow they're able to remain at peace enough to be in their temples, to continue their work, to continue their craft. And they're happy. They're content with their lives. Humans are capable of more than just being reproduction machines. Humans are capable of more than just being talking machines to others. We can build things. We can create things. We can use our will to go beyond our evolution, to go beyond what we were meant to do in the first place. Even our inventions are beginning to get around these things. You have things like vitamin D supplements. You have things like UV lights, which essentially simulate the sun, do the exact same thing. We have things like Huel, which you eat a bar of Huel a day, and it gives you all the nutrition you need. And we have things like Discord calls, which give you interaction with others over the internet with full camera and everything. We have things like YouTube podcasts, which let you vicariously experience interaction with others if you don't want to go into the territory of actually speaking yourself. There are so many inventions that we've made to keep us inside. And I think that nowadays, that will of ours, that will to be alone, to invent, to create, to take control, is all the more present, because now it's easier. It's easier than it ever was. That's not something I'm depressed about. That's something I'm actually really happy about, and I think it's time to go back. It's time to go back to what I used to do, what I used to love doing, the things that made me comfortable and content in life. That was being alone. Just to give some context to back up this whole video, to back up where I've begun to realize these things. It was my trip to the psych ward, actually. This year, the last trip that I went to, where I explained it in my second trip to the mental hospital video, that trip, I spent the majority of my time in my room alone, and very rarely did I interact with the groups. I deliberately tried to obfuscate them and pretend to be asleep and just stay alone in my room. If it was optional, I would always choose no, and when I did go, I would try to barely talk and just get it done as fast as I possibly could. I was always the quickest worker because the other people wanted to talk to each other, whereas I was strictly about business, getting the thing done and then getting out so I could go back and write more and fantasize more. And to be completely honest with you, despite the innate boredom of the mental hospital, the more I think about the time I enjoyed staying alone there, away from Discord, away from calls, away from all of these things that I've put myself into just by way of finding people, I realized that that was one of the best weeks I've had this entire year. Like, I was just so happy just staying alone by myself that honestly, I believe it did more than the actual medication did to help with my depression. That I had felt better being alone, just working on stuff in my booklet, just reading books and just thinking, than going into servers and just talking people's ears off, listening to others do the same. I know how much stress I can accrue from doing that for long enough that when I open Discord every single day out of habit just to browse what server is being chatted in, just to browse who's adding me, there's a tiredness that comes from that over time. There's a tiredness that comes from needing to be in a call just out of habit, because that's what humans are. They're habit machines. We spend enough months doing one thing, and then eventually it becomes tied to how we act. I've gone in calls for the last year so much that it's just how I act, even though on a base instinctual level, it is not what I like. It is not what I want ideologically either. And so, on an emotional level, sure, I accept these things and I'm able to do them, and they don't bother me in the sense that I'm jumping off a cliff every 5 seconds, but there's still that lingering tiredness, that lingering stress, that feeling that things ain't quite all right. And that is because I desire time alone. My time in the mental hospital was almost entirely characterized by that alone time. And I was really happy with that. I enjoyed myself just lying about. And that was without my computer. That was without the things that I use to make content beyond just a pad and paper. That was without video games. All of these other things that I use to substantiate boredom. And yet, I was happy. I was entertained by my own thoughts merely. Now think about how entertained and how happy I could be with all of the things at my disposal that I have here at home. And I thought more about this, and I knew what decision I had to make based off of how avoidant I was of others at that psych ward, because I wasn't scared of anybody. I wasn't even anxious. I used to have social anxiety. I have none. I have none now. When I go outside, it's like I'm a Chad-ass nigga just smiling and telling people, the right things that you do socially, and being super polite and laughing and being kind and all of these other things that check off the box socially. I do them, but I still want to get them done as fast as possible to go be alone again. I never go out for long. I only go out for as long as I need to. I never go out far. I only go out as far as I need to. That is the difference between me and the normies. They enjoy the interaction so much that they must partake in it as much as they can, whereas I enjoy the isolation, so I must partake in that as much as I can. I use the interactions to get the things that I need on a day-to-day basis, and then I end those interactions as fast as possible. It is not entirely avoidant of them in the sense that I'm not socially inept, but I use my strengths socially to just end the game as fast as I can to get to the thing I really care about. You know what I mean? And so I'm in this like middle ground of being an extreme loner and being an extreme charismat. I don't know if charismat is a word, but let's just roll with it. You get what I mean. And so it's weird, right? Because I built this charisma through years of watching and doing YouTube, and from talking to so many people in giant servers and just reading books that teach me how to do it. And so I'm able to just meet people and make friends and foster connections, which can be valuable in some areas, or just to get through a place. And like I'm good at doing that. And most of the people who isolate and want to be isolated are people who aren't good at doing that. Like, I know exactly how to do it, I just don't want to. People are easy. People are so easy to interact with. I just don't care. That's the weird thing. It's the thing I don't entirely understand. Well, I mean, I do, because I understand the upbringing, but for a human to be this way is just so weird and unnatural. Like, it's crazy that that my will has just ascended this far, you know? So it was that trip to the psych ward, where I realized exactly what I needed to do, and I'm gonna go back. Clarification, by go back, I did not mean go back to the psych ward, I meant go back to loneliness.